Welcome back, guys. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true disturbing stories about creepy cabins in the Appalachian Mountains. And if you've ever thought about booking a remote cabin in the hills, these stories will change your mind. But before we begin, please consider subscribing, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Let me know where you're watching from. Thank you all. Now let's start. My friend Theo had this buddy named Caleb, some guy he'd met through a night class at the community center, who owned a stretch of land way out in the Blue Ridge foothills. And I mean really out there. Past paved roads, past street signs, deep into the trees where your phone switches from no signal to just giving up entirely. The kind of place where your ears start ringing from the silence, and even your car seems nervous about the last few miles. There was an old cabin on the property that Caleb's grandfather had built by hand back in the 60s. According to him, it had stood untouched for years. No power, no plumbing, no insulation. Theo pitched it to us like it was this rustic getaway, unplugged for a few days, hike, cook over a fire, drink too much, maybe swim if the creek wasn't frozen solid. He called it a digital detox, which was hilarious coming from a guy who once brought a ring light on a camping trip. It ended up being the four of us, me, Theo, my girlfriend Mara, and Rory, Theo's cousin who I barely knew at the time. We loaded up Theo's SUV with gear, sleeping bags, coolers, camping stoves, too many granola bars, and a suspicious amount of boxed wine. The plan was 4 nights out there, Thursday through Monday, just to exist. I wasn't thrilled. I've never been a nature guy. I like knowing where I am on a map. I like light switches and running water. But Mara had been wiped out for midterms, and Theo already had the keys, so I didn't push back. It felt easier to go along than start a fight about freezing to death in a glorified shed. The day before we left, we met Caleb to grab the key. He didn't say much. He had this quiet, twitchy energy, like he was always listening for something just out of range. He handed Theo a heavy old key ring with a single rusted iron key. It looked like it belonged in a dungeon, not a cabin. And right as we were getting into the car, Caleb said one thing. "Don't go past the fork in the trail after dark. The trees bend different up there." That was it. No context, no explanation. Just that. We laughed about it for hours in the car. Called it hillbilly horror movie bait. Theo even read it back in this dramatic campfire ghost story voice. We had no idea. We reached the cabin just before sunset. The road ended a mile out, so we had to park and hike the rest. That last stretch was thick pine and uneven ground. You couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead. The silence was heavy. When we broke through the trees and saw the place, my stomach dropped. It wasn't scary, not exactly. It just didn't look right, like someone built a cabin from memory and got most of it close, but not the details. The windows were too small, set too high, like they weren't meant to be looked out of. The porch sagged to one side, though the wood looked freshly replaced. The door was narrow and too tall, like it belonged on a church. It was subtle, but it made you stare a second longer than you wanted to. Inside, it was cold and bare. 4 rooms, a big central space with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a dry sink and a busted hand pump, 2 tiny bedrooms with wire cots, and a square trapdoor in one corner, leading to a root cellar. No photos. No dust. No signs anyone had been there in years, except it was too clean. Like someone had scrubbed the place top to bottom, then just left. There were scratches along the baseboards, clusters of them, too shallow to be claws, too scattered for furniture. All about the same size, 3 or 4 inches long, wide at the base, tapering to a point, grouped low to the ground, like something small had scraped at the walls. Repeatedly, deliberately. We didn't talk about the scratches. We just pretended we hadn't seen them. That first night, we sat around the fire pit outside, boxed wine in camping mugs, marshmallows over the flames. It felt like summer camp. Around midnight, Rory went into the woods to pee. He was gone 10 minutes. When he came back, he was off. Quiet. Face pale. Shirt inside out, though none of us noticed at first. When I asked if he'd gotten lost, he just stared into the fire and muttered, "The wind's not right in there," which made no sense, because the air had been still all night. He didn't say anything else. We went inside around 1, half drunk and tired. Mara's sleeping bag, the one she'd laid out earlier, was zipped and folded neatly on the cot, like someone had packed it for her. She accused Theo. He swore he hadn't touched it. So did Rory. So did I. Then I realized my hoodie was missing. I tore through the cabin looking for it, sure I'd dropped it outside. And then Rory pointed at the door. My hoodie was hanging on a wooden hook by the frame. There hadn't been a hook there earlier. I know there hadn't. It was carved, with little notches along the edges, like tally marks. We stood there for a long time, not speaking. That was night 1. Night 2 was worse. Around 10, Theo decided he wanted to check out the trail Caleb had warned us about. He was 3 drinks deep, riding that dumb, stubborn confidence that shows up when someone's buzzed and trying to prove a point. Rory went with him. The trail forked past a broken-down fence we'd seen on the hike in. The left side curved toward the stream. The right led into tighter trees and darker brush. No signs, no tracks. Mara begged me not to follow them, so I stayed. I still don't know if that was the right choice. We waited. First half hour we made small talk. Second hour, silence. The woods grew too quiet, not peaceful, hollow. Like sound had been pulled out of the air. Even the fires seemed muted. And then the front doorknob turned. No footsteps. No warning. Just a slow twist. The door creaked open 2 inches. Nobody was there. 30 seconds later, Rory walked in. His face was blank. Eyes unfocused. Jeans soaked from the knees down. Shirt torn at the sleeve. He walked like he'd forgotten how to use his legs. I asked where Theo was. He blinked at me, confused, like I'd asked in another language. Then he said, he's still talking to her. We didn't know what to do. Tried to press him, but he shut down. Wouldn't look at us. Wouldn't answer. I grabbed a flashlight and headed out. I didn't want to go. Every part of me screamed not to. But staying felt worse. The trees looked different at night. Trunks curved toward the trail. Tops leaned in, like they were listening, like they were waiting. At the fork, the left trail looked normal. The right was churned up, like something had crawled along it. Long, dragging furrows. No boots, no animal tracks, just strange footprints. Small, wrong. Toes spaced unevenly, arched like claws. I called out for Theo. Nothing. Then something called back. Help him, not his voice. I ran. Back at the cabin, the fireplace was lit. Nobody had touched it. Rory sat in front of it whispering. Mara curled up on a cot, tears streaming silently. Rory looked at me and smiled, like it was a private joke. She didn't want him at first. She wanted me. Then he stopped talking. That night, none of us slept. Every creak in the wood, every flicker at the window, we were waiting. Around 5, Rory got up, barefoot. Walked outside, faced the woods. His lips moved. No sound. I followed. He turned to me, dead-eyed. She's still there, but she's not watching me now. Then he shoved something into my hand. A folded piece of paper. A drawing, rough and smudged, done in charcoal. The cabin, all the windows black, except one. The front one, a face inside, watching. We left that morning. Theo never came back. Rory hasn't spoken since. His family put him in a clinic near Rockbridge. A guy I work with, Micah, said his cousin owned a cabin way out in the Appalachian hills. He couldn't remember exactly where, just that it was out there somewhere, tucked in deep. Apparently the cousin hadn't used it in years, but it was still stocked and solid. A little dusty, but totally safe, were his exact words. The key would be under a flat stone by the porch steps. That was the extent of the directions. No photos, no warning, no real address. We figured, why not? It was early spring. We all needed a break. A free cabin in the woods sounded like a good idea at the time, something you'd look back on fondly, or at least with a laugh. So it was me, my fiancée Harper, my buddy Nate, and our 3 dogs. Mine, her border collie, and Nate's ancient mutt who somehow still had the energy of a toddler on sugar. We left late morning and spent most of the drive winding up into the hills. The roads got narrower the deeper we went, twisting in sharp, slow turns that made the GPS glitch out completely. It stopped updating altogether about 45 minutes before we arrived, which made finding the place a guessing game. The last stretch was more trail than road, just ruts and mud, trees pressing in like they didn't want us there. They scraped at the truck like fingernails the whole way in. When the trees finally broke, the cabin sat in a clearing like it had been dropped there by accident. Old wood, dark with age and rain, hunkered low against the slope like it was bracing for something. Not quite rotting, but definitely on the downhill slide of livable. The way it leaned slightly into the ridge made it look stubborn, like it had decided long ago it wasn't going anywhere, no matter what time or nature threw at it. Inside, it was surprisingly clean, but only in the way a place can be clean and still completely wrong. The proportions were off. There were only 2 rooms, a small kitchen, and a hallway that bent sharply to the right, almost like it had been jammed into the structure afterward. The floors weren't level. Every door hung at an angle, like the frames had settled differently. None of them closed properly. Somebody had tried to update the place with electricity. Wires were stapled along the ceiling beams, and mismatched outlet covers clung to the walls. But it looked halfway done, like whoever started the job got bored or creeped out and never came back. We brought the dogs in first. That's when things started feeling wrong. Not big, dramatic wrong, but subtle, skin prickle wrong. From the moment they crossed the threshold, none of the dogs would go near the hallway. They stuck to the main room, skirting the walls like something invisible was in the middle of the floor. When I brought in their food bowls, they bolted for the kitchen. They ate fast, no begging, no hesitation, and then ran straight back out. No lounging, no sniffing around, none of the usual dog stuff. Just business, like they were clocking in and clocking out. My dog Ralph, a food-obsessed lab mix who normally stares at you until you give him a bite, barely looked at me once his food was down. It was like he was trying not to draw attention to himself. That night, everything got worse. Around midnight, a smell started creeping into the cabin. At first, it was faint, sour, like compost or a trash bin left in the sun. Then it thickened, burning plastic mixed with something damp and rotten. It was the kind of smell that makes your body react before your brain does. I couldn't breathe through my nose without gagging. I stepped outside, thinking something had caught fire. Maybe old wiring sparked. Maybe a critter chewed through something. But as soon as I got past the porch steps, the air was completely clear. Cool, fresh. Fresh, no smell. Back inside, it hit me again. Thick and wet, worse now, like it had soaked into the walls. That same night, the lights started acting up. Not flickering, not dimming, just shutting off, then clicking back on minutes later with no warning. The kitchen lamp died while Harper was brushing her teeth. 5 minutes later, it buzzed back on, untouched. We checked the breakers. Everything was fine. The hallway light didn't even have a switch. It would just go dark, then flare back to life like nothing happened. It felt like the place had nerves, like it was twitching. The next day, Harper said she had to leave early for a shift that got moved up. She packed fast, didn't say much. I offered to go with her, but she told me and Nate to stay, finish packing. She didn't want to drag the dogs back up here later, so by evening, it was just me and Nate. Around midnight, we sat in the front room, exhausted, not even talking. The front door was across from us, 2 tall windows on either side. That's when I saw movement, a shadow, quick, across one of the panes. I froze, waited. A few seconds passed, then Nate said, "Did you see that?" He described exactly what I saw. He thought it looked like someone walking past with a flashlight. But there was no road, no path, no people, just woods. I told him it was probably a reflection, maybe a plane overhead, but we both knew better. Later, while grabbing boxes from the back hallway, Nate stopped cold. He stared into the bedroom and whispered, "There's someone in the doorway." His face drained of color. He said it was an old woman, just standing there, watching. I turned to look, nothing. I stepped inside, checked, still nothing. But Nate wouldn't go near that part of the house again. We stepped outside to shake it off. Nate lit a cigarette and pointed at a stump near the clearing. It was oozing sap thick, amber, streaming like it was freshly cut. But the top was dark, aged. It hadn't been touched in years. And yet it was bleeding. Back inside, we checked the last bedroom. Just a dresser, a box of old books, and one toy shoved into the corner. A Furby. One of those blinking things from the 90s. Crusted with dust, fur-matted gray, dead-looking. I bent down, mostly out of curiosity, just to move it. Its eyes popped open. It blinked, chattered in a scrambled robotic voice, high-pitched and garbled. I grabbed it and hurled it through the window. Glass shattered. It vanished into the yard, still chattering as it disappeared into the dark. That changed everything. The cabin felt angry, heavy. The air thickened. The walls seemed closer, not just around us, but aware of us. We rushed then. No brakes. Just grabbing and tossing things into the truck. Around 3, I was stacking boxes in the bed while Nate handed them up. That's when I saw it. Through the trees. Massive. Taller than any person. Broad shoulders hunched, limbs too long, too black to make out detail. It didn't move. Just stood there. And its eyes, 2 burning red spots. Not glowing, not flickering. Steady. Fixed on me. I jumped out of the truck and yelled that we had to go. Nate didn't move at first. Then he saw it too. We ran. Didn't close the doors. Didn't shut the tailgate. We just drove. Tires spun, mud sprayed, boxes shifted in the back. We didn't speak for hours. When we finally did, we described the same thing. The same impossible size. The same fire-colored eyes. The next morning, Harper said she forgot her patio set and wanted to go back. I tried to say no. She looked at me like I was unreasonable. So I caved. The moment we pulled into the clearing, I knew. The cabin looked the same, but the air was wrong. The ground where the garden had been was shifting. Footprints pressed into the soil, one after another, like something heavy was walking. But nothing was there. I told her to get in the truck, right now. No argument. We'd buy a new set. I didn't care if it was solid gold, we weren't staying. As we drove, she looked in the mirror. Her face went pale. Then she whispered, "It's still following us." I looked back. More footprints, still forming. Step by step, following until the trees swallowed the clearing. I haven't been back since. Jamie and Nolan had been planning a weekend away for a while, so when they asked if I wanted in, I said yes. No hesitation. We left on a Friday morning, crammed everything into Nolan's old Subaru, and drove for what felt like forever. Music blasted at first, windows down, snacks flying around the car. But as the roads got smaller, the mood shifted. Paved highways turned into narrow gravel trails, and the forest started closing in. The air got cooler, greener, thicker somehow. At one point, Jamie said, "I swear if we see a bear, I'm throwing you both to the ground and running." It was probably a joke, but I didn't laugh. Eventually, the GPS gave up, and we had to follow handwritten directions Jamie's cousin had scribbled down. Stuff like turn right at the 3rd unmarked fork and drive past the old fence, then take the dirt path on the left. Not exactly comforting, but somehow we made it. The cabin sat in a clearing just big enough for the car to pull into. Trees towered all around it. It was smaller than I expected, not some picturesque log getaway. One story. Weathered siding that hadn't seen paint in decades. The porch tilted slightly, and the stone chimney looked like it might topple if you sneezed. Jamie stepped out of the car, looked around and said, "Tell me this isn't straight out of a murder documentary." It kind of was. Still, we were there, and there was no signal, so we figured we'd make the best of it. Inside was just as worn. A single main room with a dusty fireplace and an old couch that looked like it had survived a house fire. The kitchen branched off to the left, barely big enough for 2 people. Behind the fireplace, a hallway led to 2 bedrooms, each with just a bed and a chair. The air smelled faintly of burned wood and something older, maybe mildew, maybe dust. Jamie and Nolan claimed the bedrooms. I didn't mind taking the cot near the fireplace. It felt kind of cozy. They gave me a couple of scratchy wool blankets, and I sat up next to the hearth. We unpacked our food cans, bread, fruit, snacks. No fridge, just an old cooler with ice Nolan had brought. We started a fire, made soup, played cards late into the night. It was simple, but it felt good to be off-grid. Around midnight, they both peeled off to bed, still joking, still laughing. I stayed up a bit longer, poking at the fire and soaking in the warmth. But when I finally laid back on the cot, something felt wrong. Not scary, just off. At first, it was hard to pin down. The furniture looked the same, but the spacing felt different. like the armchair by the window had shifted half a foot to the left. I stared, trying to remember if it had always been that far from the wall. Then the shadows caught my eye. They fell strangely. The flicker from the fire didn't line up with where the shadow should have been. One of them looked warped, stretched, like someone had pulled it the wrong way. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, blinked. Still wrong. I told myself I was tired. Probably the long drive, the weird lighting, maybe dehydration. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling the room was floating, like it wasn't anchored to anything. When I woke the next morning, everything looked fine. Nothing was out of place. The shadows were gone. The chair was where it should have been, or maybe it had never moved. I didn't say anything. We made breakfast. Instant coffee, granola bars, bruised bananas. We hiked that day, following a trail around a ridge. The forest was dense. Beautiful, yes, but quiet in a way that made you whisper. At one point, we stopped to listen. There was nothing, no birds, no wind, just us and our breathing. Back at the cabin, muddy and tired, we made more soup, ate by the fire, started a game of cards we never finished. That night, I noticed something else. As I sat by the fire, I looked toward the kitchen. The doorway looked wrong. Narrower, maybe. Not dramatic, just enough to make me squint and think, like someone had shaved an inch off the frame. I stared a long time, waiting for it to shift back. Eventually it did, or maybe it hadn't changed at all. I laughed it off and went to bed, but sometime after midnight a sound woke me. Something dragging across the floor, slow, deliberate, not fast enough to be an animal, too steady to be wind, a long scrape, then a pause, then another. I didn't move, just opened my eyes and stared into the dark. The sound stopped. I turned toward the kitchen. The doorway was silent. Nothing moved. The fire was almost out, just glowing coals. Eventually I fell asleep again, but it wasn't restful. In the morning, one of the kitchen chairs was out of place, moved a few feet from the table, turned to face the cot. My cot. Jamie laughed when I pointed it out. "You sleepwalk now?" she asked. I didn't. Nolan swore he hadn't touched it either. We shrugged it off, but I noticed they both looked at the chair again later. Quiet this time. We hiked again, but the forest felt different. Every trail looked familiar and wrong at the same time. Trees leaned in ways I didn't remember. The silence felt heavier, like it was listening. That last night, everything cracked open. I was dead asleep when I woke to footsteps, not inside, on the porch. Each step was heavy, deliberate. The boards creaked in rhythm, one at a time, from the edge of the deck to the door. I froze, my eyes locked on the door just a few feet from me. There was no lock, just an iron latch that barely held it closed. The footsteps stopped outside. Then the latch rattled. Once, then again, not hard, just testing it. I whispered Jamie's name. Nothing. Whispered louder. Still nothing. The hallway was silent. I sat up. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it shook the walls. I grabbed the flashlight, switched it on, and yanked the door open. Nothing. Just the porch. And trees. And darkness. But there, on the bottom step pressed into the damp wood, were footprints, bare, large, human. They led down the steps and disappeared into the trees. I slammed the door. Locked the latch, though it wouldn't do much. Then I ran to wake Jamie and Nolan. I didn't have to convince them. The look on my face did all the work. We packed in silence, threw everything into bags, left the soup pot in the sink, didn't fold anything. Nolan knocked over a chair and didn't bother picking it up. We walked fast down the trail to the car. Flashlights bouncing, eyes flicking toward every tree. When I looked back one last time, the cabin stood crooked beneath the trees, half swallowed by shadow. Porch empty. We didn't talk much on the drive home. My uncle used to say his grandfather built it with his own hands, way back when there were still logging roads cutting through the Appalachian mountains. People lived up in those hills like they were part of the woods themselves. Back then, whole families raised goats and kids in collapsing sheds. They cooked over fires and didn't think much of town life. No plumbing, no phones. Just trees, mud, and whatever you could grow or hunt. He made it sound almost romantic. like something out of an old movie. But by the time I saw it, the cabin looked like the forest had been trying to swallow it for decades. The roof slouched in the middle, the wood had turned dark and soft, and the trees pressed so close that their roots had begun pushing against the foundation stones. That summer, I had just turned 16. Joel, my cousin, had just graduated high school. My uncle thought it would be a good bonding trip to send us up there together with a few tools, a couple of bags of food, and a stack of vague instructions. Fix it up a little, he told us. Sweep it out, patch the roof if you can, get it back in shape. I don't think either of us believed we were going to get much done, but it sounded like an adventure. We were teenagers. We didn't really think things through. The first glimpse of the place came at the end of a narrow footpath that curved up into the trees for what felt like forever. No cell service, no signs, just trees and more trees until suddenly, there it was, leaning to the right, one shutter hanging by a rusted hinge, and the front door looking like it had been kicked in and badly reattached. It creaked when the wind touched it, a low, miserable sound, like it was groaning from the joints. We spent most of that first day hauling our gear inside and sweeping out what had clearly been a small animal's den. There were droppings in the corners and what might have been a bird's nest tucked up between two beams. We shook out the bedding, dusted off the table, and tried not to think about tetanus. There was no electricity, just a busted lantern and a half-empty bottle of lamp oil my uncle had packed. We figured it would last a few nights if we were careful. That evening, we set our cots up against the back wall, away from the drafty windows and whatever might wander past. When we tried to close the front door, we realized it didn't fit the frame anymore. The top corner stuck out no matter how hard we shoved. Joel joked that it was mountain ventilation. I gave him a laugh, but honestly, it made me uneasy. That gap was just wide enough to see slivers of movement, if anything or anyone was outside. The first weird thing happened that night, though it was subtle. Joel left his boots beside the hearth before bed. When we woke up, they were placed neatly at the foot of his cot, laces tied, toes perfectly aligned. He blinked at them, then looked at me. "Did you move my boots?" he asked, half laughing. I hadn't touched them. He nodded like he believed me, but I could tell he was unsettled. We both were. Still, we let it go. Maybe he moved them and forgot. Maybe he was sleepwalking. Maybe we just wanted to believe that. The second night, I left my pocket knife on the table next to the lantern. When I went to grab it the next morning, it was gone. I checked the table, the floor, even dug through my backpack. Joel rolled his eyes and told me to calm down, but he went quiet when he saw it. The knife was stuck in the door frame, buried in the wood at shoulder height, perfectly straight, like someone had thrown it. He stared, then looked at me. "Are you messing with me?" he asked. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew I hadn't done it. By the third night, we weren't making jokes anymore. We just played cards quietly, lantern between us, trying not to look at the windows. The fire in the hearth had gone out, but neither of us wanted to get up. That's when we heard it, movement, above us. At first it was faint, like shifting weight or creaking wood, but then it grew louder, deliberate, slow, heavy steps crossing from one side of the roof to the other, back and forth, steady, measured. We froze. There's no attic, no loft, nothing up there but the roof and the open sky. Joel grabbed the lantern and we stepped outside, hearts pounding. The roof was empty. No branches, no animals, nothing but sagging shingles. We walked the perimeter, shining light up at every angle. Still nothing, but the sound continued, soft, just out of sync with our movements, like it didn't want to be seen. Back inside, the air felt heavy, clinging to our skin. Every time we tried to sit still, something would knock, sometimes once, sometimes twice, sometimes on one wall, then answered by a tap from the opposite side. Joel dropped the deck of cards. His hands were shaking too much to hold them. He didn't try to pick them up. The fourth night is the one that broke us. We'd given up pretending everything was fine. We whispered about leaving, trying not to sound too scared, when suddenly the front door slammed shut on its own. Hard. The sound echoed. The frame shook. We stared at it. Then came the footsteps. Outside, circling the cabin. Slow, dragging footsteps. Shuffling through the dirt and leaves. Once, twice, again. Round and round. We killed the lantern without speaking and sat there in the dark, barely breathing. The footsteps picked up, then slowed, then silence. Right outside the door, we waited. I don't know how long, minutes, hours. Then the doorknob twitched, just once. Not a turn, not a jiggle, just a sharp twitch, like someone flicking it to see if it would move. That was it. We didn't sleep. We sat until the sun pushed through the cracks in the walls. When morning came, we packed fast, threw everything into our bags and tried to open the door. It wouldn't budge. We shoved with our shoulders, kicked it, until the hinges shrieked and it cracked open. Outside, in the soft dirt, was a perfect ring of footprints. Bare, deep, flat and wide, toes splayed like something that had never worn shoes. They circled the cabin again and again, overlapping, before veering into the trees. We didn't speak. We didn't stop to eat. We left everything, our bedding, our food, the tools. We hiked straight down the hill, never looking back, until we reached the old truck. I was 33 when I booked that cabin in Marchwood. It was a quick, impulsive decision after a rough couple of weeks. Work had gotten overwhelming, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing, and I hadn't had more than 5 minutes to myself in what felt like months. I needed quiet. No meetings, no emails, no conversations. Just time to sit, breathe, and let my brain slow down. The listing looked perfect. A tiny wooden cabin on a ridge, supposedly built in the 50s but charmingly updated. There was a photo of a porch swing facing a valley, and one of those wide-open shots of the sky that makes you want to pack a bag immediately. It promised complete privacy. No neighbors in sight, no Wi-Fi, no TV. At the bottom it said, "Disconnect to reconnect." Sounded like exactly what I needed. But the moment I pulled up, something felt off. The cabin looked like it had been dropped there and forgotten. It wasn't centered on the ridge, it leaned to one side like a support beam had given up years ago. Smaller than the photos, darker too. The wood had a dull gray tone, like it had soaked up decades of rain. One chain on the porch swing was twisted, creaking slightly as it swayed. I sat there in the car, keys in hand, wondering if I should have read the reviews more closely. Still, I was already there. I'd driven nearly 4 hours, and turning back would have felt like defeat. I told myself the photos were just outdated or touched up. The inside would be better. It wasn't. The moment I stepped through the door, it felt like a slanted funhouse. The floor tilted inward toward the center of the room, like the whole place was slowly sinking. Gravity seemed to nudge you toward the dip as you walked. The furniture didn't match the listing. No sleek leather couch, just a sagging plaid one that smelled faintly damp. Not mold exactly. More like fabric that never quite dried. The coffee table was scratched up, like someone had dragged tools across it. One chair sat crooked, its legs wobbling when I leaned on it. Everything felt off-kilter. Crooked pictures. A slanted shelf. Windows that didn't quite shut. But I reminded myself I hadn't come for aesthetics. I wanted quiet, nothing else. I dropped my bag in the bedroom, opened the windows, and tried to settle in. That first evening, I cooked something simple, canned soup and toast. I stood in the kitchen, listening to the stillness. No emails, no pings. Just the creak of old wood and the sound of a spoon against the pot. I carried my plate to the table, and that's when I saw it. The hallway. It ran straight from the main room toward the back. Earlier, I'd walked it 2 doors, bathroom on the left, bedroom on the right. Short, narrow, normal, but now there were 3. I stopped. I stared. Bathroom, bedroom, and at the end, one more. Flat against the wall, painted the same pale yellow, no knob, no handle, just a blank rectangle where nothing had been before. I retraced my steps, walking back to the front door and down the hallway again. It felt longer. The lighting maybe, the angle, but something about it was wrong. I set my plate down and walked closer. Bathroom left, bedroom right, and the third door dead center. No frame, no trim, just a cold, solid surface. I pressed my hand against it. The wood was chilled, unmoving. I heard nothing on the other side, no breeze, no thud, just silence. And I knew that door hadn't been there when I arrived. I stood there, searching for an explanation. Settling wood, shadows. exhaustion. Maybe I'd simply missed it. Eventually, I shook it off, picked up my plate, and sat down to eat. But I didn't sleep well that night. I left the bedroom door cracked, angled just enough to see the hallway. Around midnight, the floor creaked. Not random creaks, not settling. Footsteps, evenly spaced. Slow, heavy, like someone barefoot, walking down the hall, one board. Then another, then another. My mouth went dry. I didn't move. I just lay there staring through the gap. And there it was, the third door, sharper now. Edges more defined, like it had stepped forward out of the wall. And in my gut, I felt it wanted me to notice, like it was waiting for acknowledgement. I stared until daylight seeped through the window. And just like that, it was gone. The hallway was short again. 2 doors, everything normal. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I was relieved. Stress, fatigue, maybe even sleep paralysis, none of it was real. The next day I stayed out. Trails, mud on my shoes, granola on a rock. I avoided the cabin as long as possible. When I came back, everything looked fine. I made tea, read a book, almost believed it was behind me. But that night, everything changed. I stepped out of the bathroom, drying my hands, and froze. The hallway was deeper, much deeper. The floor felt wrong, like someone had swapped out the boards. The wood grain ran in the opposite direction. Each step echoed hollow, like I was walking across a box. And the third door wasn't just there. It was open. No knob, no frame, just a black gap at the end of the hall. My first thought was, it must lead outside. But no breeze came through, no night air, no sound of crickets, only silence. And then I heard it, a dragging sound. Something brushing against the floor inside the dark, slow, steady, like fabric pulled across wood. I froze. Every part of me screamed not to move. That if I stepped closer, I would see something I could never unsee, something that didn't belong in this world. My vision pulsed with my heartbeat, and then I ran. No thinking, no packing. I grabbed my keys, yanked the front door open, and bolted. The swing groaned as I passed, but I didn't look back. I dove into the driver's seat, started the car with shaking hands, and tore down the gravel road, headlights bouncing, dust flying. I didn't stop until I was 2 towns away. I was 32 when I agreed to watch over a cabin way out in the Appalachians. It belonged to the uncle of a guy I worked with, a guy named Darren. We weren't close, just the kind of co-workers who nod to each other in the hallway and maybe trade the occasional dumb joke during meetings. His uncle had passed away suddenly, heart attack or something like that, and the family didn't have the time or energy to drive down right away and deal with the property. They wanted someone to just be there, hold the place down until they could sort through the guy's stuff. Watch the place, basically. I think Darren called it keeping an eye on things, which sounded harmless enough. I guess I said yes because I figured I could use the break. At the time, my apartment felt too small. Work was dragging. The idea of a few quiet days in the woods sounded almost peaceful. No emails, no meetings, no noisy neighbors. Just me, some books, maybe a few drinks in the evening, and no one around to bug me. I was picturing a rustic little cabin, some creaky floorboards, a fire pit out back, something you'd see in an old camping catalog. I didn't ask many questions. That was my first mistake. Getting there was already more of a hassle than I expected. Darren gave me an old set of keys and a drawn map on lined paper, which should have been my second clue. I drove out past a town called Hollow Glen, barely more than a gas station and a diner. Then I followed a twisting mountain road that gradually turned from pavement to cracked gravel. The last stretch was steep enough that my car tapped out completely. I had to park at a bend where the road narrowed too much for comfort and finish the last half mile on foot. The trail was mostly uphill, slick with moss in some places, and shaded so heavily by trees that it felt like twilight, even though it was barely past noon. I didn't hear a single bird the whole walk up. Just the crunch of my boots on the damp ground, and the occasional rustle of leaves when I brushed against them. The first glimpse of the cabin made me stop. It looked like it had grown there instead of being built, like someone had just convinced the forest to cough up a house. 1 story, porch sagging on one side, every window covered, some with nailed shutters, others with thick, warped boards. The wood had turned that tired gray color you see on old barns, the kind of dry rot that seems almost soft to the touch. There wasn't a path leading up to it, just uneven stone steps that disappeared into the ground in places. Inside was quiet. Heavily quiet, if that makes sense. The air was thick with the kind of stillness that makes your ears ring. It smelled like dust, with this faint tang of iron underneath, like someone had left a box of nails open too long. There was a rusted stove tucked into one corner, a cot with a lumpy mattress in the other, and shelves along the back wall crammed full of old jars. Some were cloudy. Others looked like they'd once held jam or peaches or who knows what, now turned into strange floating mush. I did a walk through, half expecting to find some rodent squatters, but everything was surprisingly untouched. No droppings, no nests, no signs of animals. The doors locked. The windows were sealed shut, really sealed. The shutters had been nailed from the outside, and even where the boards looked like they might be loose, they didn't budge. For a place that had been empty for years, it didn't look ransacked or weather-wrecked. It just looked frozen. That first night, I didn't sleep great. The cot felt like it had rocks stuffed inside it, and every little sound, the pop of the old stove settling, the rustle of a tree branch outside, made me jerk awake. I kept telling myself it was just cabin sounds. Old wood creaks, nature doing its thing. But around 3 in the morning, I found myself holding the flashlight and just staring at the door, like I was waiting for something to knock. The next morning, I stepped outside with a cup of instant coffee and stopped short. The dirt around the cabin was covered in footprints, bare feet. No shoes, no boots. Just wide, heavy impressions sunk deep into the soil, even though it hadn't rained. They circled the entire cabin in a looping path, like someone had paced around it all night. The weird part, well, one of the weird parts, was how evenly spaced they were. Not hurried, not random. Just slow, deliberate steps, around and around and around. I followed them a few yards into the trees, heart already thudding, and then they just ended. No scattered dirt, no trail fading into underbrush. Just one final step, and then nothing. Like someone had walked in a straight line and vanished mid-stride. I stood there longer than I probably should have, trying to make sense of it. I told myself they had to be old. Maybe they'd dried weird, or some animal had left prints that just looked human, but deep down, I knew they were fresh. The ground was soft but not muddy, and the depth of the impressions didn't lie. That night, I locked the doors and dragged the stove closer to the back one just to make myself feel better. I woke up to porch boards creaking, slow, careful pressure, like someone shifting their weight from one foot to the other. Not fast, not random. The same deliberate pace I'd seen in the footprints. I sat up on the cot and held the flashlight tight enough my fingers ached. No knocks, no voices, just creaking, then silence. Eventually, I got up, opened the door just a crack, and aimed the light outside. Nothing, just the same warped boards in the slope of the hill. But in the beam of the flashlight, I saw it, new prints, layered perfectly over the old ones. That was the second night. The third day was when things inside started to change. When I got back from a short walk, not far, I wasn't exactly in the mood to explore. I noticed the zipper on my duffel had been pulled open. Not all the way, just enough to see the edge of a folded shirt sticking out. Except that shirt wasn't folded anymore. It was draped across a chair near the stove, like someone had held it up and laid it down gently. The chair itself had moved too. It had been tucked under the table, and now it was angled, turned to face the cot where I slept. I stared at it for a solid minute, willing myself to believe I had done it and just forgotten. But I hadn't. I know I hadn't. Then I saw the jar. One of the old cloudy jars from the shelf was sitting directly in the middle of the floor. Centered. Like someone had placed it with care. I picked it up, hands trembling, fingers sweaty, and put it back on the shelf. I straightened the chair, refolded the shirt, closed the duffel. But that feeling didn't go away. That feeling like something was still in the room with me, just out of view, watching how I fixed its arrangement. That night, I sat up on the cot with the flashlight on and didn't even pretend I was going to sleep. I stayed that way for hours. At some point, my eyelids got too heavy. The next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of glass scraping across the floor. One of the jars was rolling, tipped on its side, spinning lazily like someone had just flicked it with their finger. I froze, watching it clink softly across the floorboards. Then I shifted the light and saw the chair again. It had moved, closer this time. Just a few inches, but enough to notice. Still facing the cot, still facing me. The doors were locked, the windows sealed. No one had come in, nothing had opened, and yet here it was. This slow rearrangement, like the cabinet itself was being set, as if I was the only thing out of place. That pressure in the room was unbearable, not like air or heat, more like attention, like the walls were focusing on me. I could feel it in my throat, heavy, quiet, intent. I left. I shoved everything into the duffel without checking what I'd packed. I didn't put the jar back. I didn't straighten the chair. I left the door swinging open and didn't even glance at the porch. I walked straight into the woods, flashlight in one hand, bag over my shoulder, boots slipping on damp roots. I didn't stop when the underbrush snapped beside me. I didn't turn when something, not wind, moved just outside the beam of light. I didn't breathe until I saw the shine of my car through the trees and finally got the key into the ignition on the third try. I drove. I didn't look back. I kept going until I saw other cars again, until gas stations looked normal, and the sky didn't feel like it was pressing down on me. We were out turkey hunting, just me and my cousin Darren, deep in the ridge country past Lake Brecken. You probably haven't heard of it, most folks haven't. It's one of those places where the trees all start to look the same after a while and you lose cell signal halfway up the old logging road. That's part of why we go. Peace and quiet, no distractions. Just a couple of days to get out of our heads. That morning, we started early. Darren always insists the best time to move is right before sunrise, when it's still too cold to think clearly, and your boots soak through with dew in the first 10 steps. We had a few spots marked from last season, but about an hour into the hike, he veered off the trail. Said he thought he heard something. What we found wasn't a turkey. It was a cabin. Low-roofed, half-sunken, nearly hidden behind a curtain of pine and bramble. It looked like it had been swallowed by the woods a long time ago. Honestly, I might have walked right past it if he hadn't stopped and pointed. The wood was gray and weathered. Shingles missing like teeth. Windows reduced to streaked glass under layers of grime. Darren grinned like a kid who'd found a secret fort. Bet there's moonshine stashed in there, he said. I didn't laugh. I felt uneasy right away. There was this pressure in my chest and I couldn't explain why. The kind of feeling you get when you walk into a room and just know someone's been fighting in there. It was quiet, sure, but not the peaceful kind. More like the pause before something starts. He pushed the door open. It didn't take much. The frame had rotted around the hinges, and the whole thing tilted inward with a tired groan. I followed him inside. The air was still, but stale. Not just musty, but thick, like it hadn't moved in years. We stepped onto a floor coated in dust. Not the thin kind you find in attics, but a dense, undisturbed layer that made a soft crunch under our boots. Then I saw the footprints. They were bare, human. Too clear to be old. You could see heel marks, arches, even individual toes. They started right inside the door and went straight to the far corner of the main room. And then they just stopped. There was nothing in that corner, no doorway. No furniture, just empty, sagging boards warped from time and moisture. I stood there too long, staring, trying to reason with it. I even looked up, as if maybe someone had gone through a loft or trapdoor. But there was nothing above us but rafters. Darren shrugged. Probably some drifter slept here once, no big deal. But I knew the dust told a different story. You don't leave prints that sharp unless they're recent. I didn't say it out loud, just nodded and let him move through. We split up, more out of habit than decision. He went down a hallway that led to the back. I stayed in the main room and wandered into what looked like the kitchen. Everything was old, older than either of us, but it wasn't just abandoned. It looked interrupted. The stove was still loaded with unburned wood. Jars sat open on the table, their contents evaporated into crystals. Others were sealed tight, lids rusted and bulging. Shelves were packed with glass containers, some filled with yellowed liquid. Inside, I caught glimpses I didn't want to study too long. Something like a tiny hand in one jar, and in another, a pale knot that looked like roots or tendons. I moved into the next room. A bedroom, maybe. At least, it had a bed frame. The mattress had been torn open. Not cut torn. The fabric split like it had been clawed from the inside. Stuffing scattered across the floor, dragged out like something had been digging. The more I looked, the more frantic it seemed. Then I noticed the wall behind the bed. Scratches. Long ones, carved into the paneling. Not even. Staggered. Some shallow, some deep. And wide not from a knife or tool. From fingers. Human fingers. That's when I called out for Darren. No answer. I called again, louder. Still nothing. The house wasn't big, but sound didn't carry. It just died. I walked back through the kitchen, careful not to disturb anything. And then I saw the prints again. Only this time, there were more. A second trail had appeared. Same size, same shape, but newer. The dust ridged around them like someone had just walked through flour. They started in the same corner as before, but this time they were headed out back toward the door. They hadn't been there earlier. I was sure. I had stood in that exact spot. My whole body went still. Arms numb, chest tight, breath shallow. I backed up and stepped outside. I started yelling for Darren. The clearing was empty. Trees swayed, but there was no wind. Nothing moved. Then he came crashing through the brush. Stumbling. Running. He looked pale, lips cracked, eyes glassy. He didn't speak at first. Just bent over, hands on his knees, fingers twitching. When he finally looked at me, his voice cracked. Something was calling my name. I waited. He went on. It came from behind me. Then the other side. Then closer. At one point, it sounded like me. Like my own voice. He was trembling. Not dramatic, just constant. Like his body couldn't shut it off. I told him about the prints. He didn't ask what they looked like. He didn't look at the cabin. He just nodded once, and we started walking. We didn't run. We didn't speak. We just kept moving in silence, like we were trying not to wake something. Every branch crack made us flinch. The air grew heavier the farther we got, as if it wanted to hold us there. It took nearly an hour to reach the truck. When we saw it, I almost laughed from relief. Darren climbed in first and turned the key. The engine roared, loud and jarring after all that stillness. I got in but didn't close my door right away. I was looking at the tree line. I can't explain why, but I expected to see something there. Not a person, not movement. Just a shape. An outline. But there was nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling we weren't supposed to see that place. That we hadn't just found it, it had waited. We drove back to town without speaking. At one point, Darren turned the radio on. Only static hissed until he shut it off. When we got back, we didn't unload our gear. We just sat in his living room, drinking warm beer, saying little. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about the prints. How sharp they were, how fresh. Like something had stepped out of that corner while we were both still inside. We never told anyone. Not really. Friends asked if we'd caught anything, and we just said no. We both stopped hunting for a while. Darren moved 2 towns over. Said he needed a change of pace. I didn't press him. As for me, I haven't been back to that ridge. I couldn't even find the spot again if I tried. The forest swallowed it back up. But sometimes, when it's real quiet and I'm alone, I still see those prints. Clear as day. And I can't stop wondering what else might have been standing in that corner. The cabin had been sitting empty for years, but I stayed there anyway. A guy I worked with, Jordan, said his uncle owned it. According to him, it was just this little structure tucked way back on a ridge in southern West Virginia, deep in the hills. I could use it for free if I didn't mind the drive. He made it sound like a favor, but I think he just wanted someone else to go up there first. I told him I didn't mind the drive. I really didn't. I was between apartments and needed a cheap place to crash while I sorted things out. More than that, I wanted quiet. The kind you can't buy in a city, no matter how high your rent is. The kind you only get when there's no signal, no neighbors, no freeway hum. Just trees, dirt, and time. Getting there was always the same. The drive from town took a little over 2 hours, most of it on winding roads that got skinnier the deeper I went. Guardrails disappeared. Gas stations got fewer and stranger. The last stretch, the part that climbed up into the ridge, was practically vertical. Tight switchbacks, soft shoulders, blind curves where all you could do was hope no one else was barreling down in the opposite direction. I remember leaning forward, like that would somehow help the car push through the incline. By the time I parked, my ears would pop from the elevation. It always felt like the trees had eaten the sky. The forest up there was dense, claustrophobic. The trees leaned in, crowding the road, blocking out so much light that even at noon, everything looked like early evening. It was the kind of place where you never saw far ahead, just a few feet in front of you. The cabin itself wasn't much. A single main room with a wood stove, a tiny kitchen tucked into one corner, a narrow hallway that ended at one bedroom. The whole thing leaned slightly to one side, like it had given up fighting gravity years ago and was just waiting for someone to notice. The porch groaned when I stepped on it, loud enough to make my skin crawl the first time. But inside, the floors were solid. Dry, quiet. It smelled like dust and old wood. Not musty exactly, just baked in. Like the beams had soaked up decades of pine sap and smoke and were still exhaling it slowly. There was no insulation, no heater besides the stove. No running water unless I hiked to the creek and filled a pail. Still, I liked it. It was simple. It did what I needed it to do. I spent the first evening unpacking, lit the lantern, checked the little pantry. It was stocked with a few basics, matches, canned beans, some questionable instant coffee. I made a mental note to bring better supplies next time and figured I'd head into town in a few days. There was no reception at the cabin, not even a flicker of signal. Everything ran slower. No distractions, no messages. Just whatever you decided to do that day. That first night, I noticed the windows. When I arrived, I'd counted 4. 2 in the front of the cabin, 1 on the side, and 1 in the bedroom. I remember counting them from outside because one of them had a cracked pane I meant to tape up. But later, walking through the place, something felt off. The main room had 3 windows, not 2. The kitchen had 1 too. That made no sense, because that wall faced a steep slope that ran right up to the cabin, almost touching it. No way there was space for a window there. I stepped outside and walked the perimeter again, tried to match what I'd seen inside. It didn't add up. I circled twice, slower the second time, thinking maybe I'd missed one. But no, from the outside, the cabin had 4 windows. From the inside, it had 5. I stood there for a while, probably longer than I should have, just staring at the siding, trying to spot the outline of that extra window. I told myself it was poor design, warped wood. Maybe the interior layout was strange and the window looked like it was in a different spot. I was tired. Maybe I just miscounted. Either way, I let it go. The next few days passed quietly, mostly, but then little things started shifting. I'd leave the lantern by the stove. Later, I'd find it sitting on the windowsill. Once, I left my book open on the arm of the chair. An hour later, it was closed and placed neatly on the table. My toothbrush, the bristles, were bent backward one morning, like someone had used the wrong end. The knives in the drawer kept flipping around. Every time I opened it, the blades faced a different direction than before. Nothing big, nothing obvious, just enough to make me stop and stare. I kept telling myself I was tired, that it was easy to forget where you put things when you were alone in the woods and your schedule had gone fuzzy. But every time I noticed something had moved, my body tensed before my brain even processed it. Like my nerves picked it up first. I started moving more slowly through the cabin, checking things twice, blocking the bedroom door at night even though I was the only one there. One morning, I found a dead bird inside. A little brown one curled up on the floor near the cracked window. No blood, no broken glass, no sign of how it got in. It just looked like it had laid down and stopped moving. I buried it out back with a kitchen spoon. I don't know why. It just felt wrong to toss it in the woods. By the second week, the weirdness stopped trying to be subtle. I came back from the creek late one afternoon with a pail of water and nearly dropped it when I stepped inside. A door was nailed shut on the far wall of the main room. Not a loose board or a hatch. An actual door. Old, splintered, set into the logs with thick metal hinges. Someone had hammered rough boards across it, uneven and overlapping, like they'd been in a rush to seal it up. It looked like it had been there for years. Except I had walked that wall dozens of times. I'd leaned against it. It had been solid, There was no door. I didn't move. I just stared. For a moment, I thought I heard something faint from the other side, a soft, repeated scrape, like nails against wood, but maybe that was just my own heartbeat. I blinked once, and the door was gone. The wall was just logs again, seamless, no gaps, no hinges, no scratches where the boards had been, nothing. I backed out of the room and stood in the kitchen doorway, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. That night, I didn't even try to sleep in the bedroom. I dragged the chair into the kitchen and sat up with the lantern on, flipping through the same 3 pages of a book without reading them. Around 3 in the morning, I finally dozed off. I woke to the sound of furniture scraping. It was loud, wood against wood, chairs being dragged across the floor. I jumped up, heart pounding, and looked into the main room. Everything had been moved. The table, the chairs, the shelf I'd stacked with food, every single thing was arranged in a perfect circle in the middle of the room. And in the center of that circle, my boots, standing upright, both of them facing the wall where the door had appeared. I didn't touch them. I just picked the boots up and carried them outside, left them by the fire pit. When I came back in, they were already back in the circle. Same position, same angle, like I hadn't moved them at all. I shoved the furniture back where it belonged, stuffed the boots in the closet, and sat on the floor with my back to the stove until the sky lightened. I didn't go near the windows. The next morning, I decided I was done. I packed everything: food, books, spare socks. I even took the coffee, awful as it was. I was ready to go before the sun was fully up. But the trail to my car didn't behave. It always took 10 minutes. I'd walked it enough times to know it by heart. That day, it stretched, twisted, looped back on itself, like I was walking in circles. I recognized trees repeating. The switchbacks doubled. New ones appeared where they hadn't before. The forest felt closer, heavier, like it was leaning in. By the time I reached the car, I was soaked in sweat and breathing hard. My watch said I'd been walking for nearly 40 minutes. At the gas station in Harper Ridge, the cashier looked at me for a beat too long before asking if I was sick. I told him no. Even though my shirt was clinging to my back and my throat felt raw, I should have kept driving. Should have put 3 states between me and that ridge. But I went back, one last time. Told myself I left something important. A charger, a book, something I needed. But I think I just wanted to see if it was still real. I got there just after dark. The cabin looked the same from the outside. Still sagging, still crooked. My bag was by the door, zipped up tight. I unlocked the door and stepped in. Only I didn't step into the cabin. I stepped into another room, identical in every way. Same stove, same lantern, same crooked chair leg. My bag was there too, sitting on the table like it had been waiting. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I backed out, shut the door, locked it, and climbed out the bedroom window instead. I scraped my arm, tore my shirt on a nail, and dropped my bag in the dirt before scrambling out after it. I didn't stop running until I was inside the car with the doors locked and the engine on. I only looked back once, through the rearview mirror. The cabin was there, but the windows were gone. Every single one. Just blank, smooth walls, like it had sealed itself shut. I didn't stop driving until daylight. The listing I'd found online was vague to the point of being suspicious. There were maybe 4 blurry photos total, and none of them showed the full cabin, just corners, a partial roof, a stretch of woods. There was no exact address until after the booking was confirmed. No reviews. Not even a real name attached to the host, just the initials, JW. And under the description, one line: remote stay for guests who need complete privacy. I'd laughed when I saw it. That was exactly what I was looking for. Life had been loud for a while. Too loud. Between work stress, friends asking too much, and a family that never knew how to leave well enough alone, I'd gotten to the point where I didn't want to talk to a single person. I didn't want friendly check-ins or inspirational quotes texted at 2 a.m. I wanted silence. I wanted distance. I wanted to vanish for a week without explanation. So the lack of details didn't scare me off. It practically reeled me in. Getting there was a whole different story. The GPS gave up about 10 minutes before I arrived, And after that, I had to rely on the host's vague instructions. Stay left at the fork, turn at the third stump with a white rock on top, go past the hollow tree. You'll see the cabin eventually. Right. The road, or what used to be a road, felt like it hadn't been maintained in decades. It started as gravel, turned to packed dirt, then to a messy blend of mud and stone that had my tires slipping and whining like they were begging to go back to civilization. The trees got denser the further in I drove, branches tapping at my windows like they were trying to peek inside. At one point I stopped and got out to move a fallen limb that was too big to drive over. By the time I pulled up to the cabin, my nerves were already fraying. It was smaller than I expected. A squat little thing built from dark logs, some of which looked almost black, not painted, just aged or burned. The roof was a patchwork of tin sheets nailed over what had probably been a proper shingled roof once. Now it looked like someone had fixed it with whatever scrap metal they had lying around. It had the kind of sagging porch that made you wonder if one wrong step would send you straight through the boards. But it was there, standing, and it was mine for the week. Inside, the cabin was bare but usable. One cot pushed against the wall. A tiny wood stove in the corner with a dented kettle sitting on top. A little table with a single chair. No bathroom, just a compost toilet in a shed out back, which, let me tell you, is not charming after dark. The only mirror in the place was mounted oddly high on the wall. Standing on my toes, I could barely see my eyebrows in it. Who does that? Still, I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't here for luxury. I was here for quiet. For once in my life, I didn't have to answer to anyone. The first day was uneventful in the best way. I chopped a little firewood, got the stove going, heated up a can of chili, and cracked open a book I hadn't touched in months. I sat on the porch for a while watching the trees sway. No phone signal, no neighbors, just birds and wind, and that buzzing kind of stillness you forget exists when you live near a city. I went to bed that night thinking maybe I'd done the right thing coming here, and then something weird happened. It wasn't dramatic or terrifying, just off. Lying in the cot, I could see out the back window where the forest sloped upward behind the cabin. When I'd arrived, I remembered spotting a hunting blind up on the ridge. It caught my eye because it was tilted to one side, like it had been there so long it was sinking into the hill. But when I glanced out that window again before bed, it was gone. Just not there anymore. I figured I was remembering wrong. Maybe I'd seen a tree stump or some shadows and thought it was a blind. I told myself I was tired. Let it go. Pulled the curtain closed and went to sleep. Next morning, though, it was back. Same place, same awkward lean. Now I was curious. I made coffee, threw on my jacket, and hiked up to check it out. It wasn't a far walk, maybe 5 minutes up the ridge, but the air felt heavier up there, like it hadn't moved in a while. And when I reached the blind, something felt wrong. It looked new. I mean new. The wood was clean, pale, rough around the edges. Nails still silver. I ran a hand along one of the support beams and got a splinter. That's how fresh it felt. I climbed up inside expecting to find old wrappers, bullet casings, whatever people leave behind in these things. But it was spotless. No trash. No footprints. Nowhere. Like no one had ever used it. That stuck with me all day. That evening, while the kettle was heating, I looked out the back window again and froze. There was another blind. Lower on the slope this time. Closer. Smaller. And this one? It was facing directly at the cabin. I set the mug down fast and walked away from the window. My hands weren't steady anymore. The third day, I didn't even try to pretend everything was fine. Every time I looked outside, there seemed to be more of them. Not by a lot, but enough to notice if you were paying attention. They were forming a path, not a straight one more like a crooked line, zigzagging toward the cabin. Always closer, always facing forward. By sunset, the nearest one was maybe 20 feet away. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window with the lights off and just watched. The blinds never moved. But they changed. The new, raw wood started to gray. The nails darkened. Moss bloomed across the edges like veins, slow and creeping. They looked like they'd been there for decades, old and weathered and patient, but they never collapsed. They never leaned further. They just waited. Day 4, I barely ate. I stopped checking the time. Every window I looked out of had a blinding view. Some high in the trees, some low, half sunk into the dirt. I stopped counting. What was the point? On the fifth morning, I opened the front door and nearly stepped on a bundle of chopped firewood, tightly packed, tied with twine, set neatly against the wall like a gift. I hadn't touched the axe since day one. I don't even remember grabbing my stuff. Just flashes shoving clothes into bags, knocking over the water jug, grabbing my keys from the nail by the door. My heart wouldn't slow down. My arms felt like they belonged to someone else. The car started on the first try. That alone felt like a miracle. And then the radio turned on by itself. I hadn't touched it once, not since I got there. It crackled with static, loud enough to make the speakers rattle. I reached to shut it off, and that's when I heard it. A voice, low, clear, like someone was sitting in the passenger seat, leaning in. One word, Ronan. I didn't look at the mirrors. I didn't look out the windows. I just drove. The road felt even narrower on the way out. Trees too close. Branches scraping the sides of the car like fingernails. I don't remember how many turns I took. I just kept going until I saw pavement again. When I hit the first gas station, I didn't slow down. I jerked the wheel into the lot, parked sideways, jumped out. The clerk inside barely looked up as I walked in, handed him my keys and said, "You want a car? Take it." Then I walked, and I kept walking. I never checked the listing again, never tried to get my deposit back. The first time I saw the cabin, I was halfway up a dry creek bed in the Blue Ridge stretch of the Appalachians. I was trying to loop back to the trail I'd somehow veered off. One wrong turn, and I'd wandered downhill, thinking I was circling back. Instead, I realized I was deeper in than before. It's easy to get turned around out there. The landscape folds into itself, ridge after ridge like waves in slow motion. Each one just familiar enough to be convincing, and just different enough to betray you. I wasn't panicking. I've hiked plenty. I bushwhacked my way back to trails before. I figured I'd just climb up until I crossed the ridge and picked up a marker or cairn. Worst case, I'd backtrack once I hit the top. But then I saw the cabin. It slouched between two poplars, just visible through a break in the underbrush. No trail, no signs, nothing that suggested anyone had ever walked to it. It looked like something the woods had merely swallowed, like the trees had closed around it to keep it hidden. And somehow, I was standing there staring straight at it. It looked wrong. Not just old or abandoned, wrong. I've seen plenty of old homesteads and hunting shacks out here. The kind that collapse under snow and time, with rusted tools still hanging on the porch and deer skulls nailed to the beams. Those make sense. This one didn't. The cabin didn't belong where it was. It looked dropped there, crooked and half-sunken, its roof bowed in the middle like soaked cardboard. No porch. No windows on the side I could see. Just a single door and a roof trying its best not to give up. And I walked straight to it. I don't know why. Maybe curiosity, maybe something dumber. I remember thinking, if it's this far out, maybe there's something cool left inside. Old tools, maybe a coin jar tucked in the floorboards, that kind of hope you get when you're far from anyone and find something untouched. The door didn't want to open. The wood was dark and swollen, soaked 100 times and dried just enough to warp. I pressed, and it pushed back. When I leaned in with my shoulder, the latch gave with a crack, and the whole door lurched open at once, like it was tired of pretending to stay shut. The air inside hit me. It was warm. Not the faint warmth of sun-soaked walls. This was humid, close warmth, like someone had been breathing in there for hours. It was one room, just one. A stone fireplace sat in the far corner, cold and unused. A narrow table leaned to the side, one leg propped with a rock. Shelves were nailed unevenly into the walls, slapped together without care for spacing or symmetry. But that wasn't what got me. It was the jars. Dozens of glass jars. Some wide, some tall. Cloudy fingerprints smeared across the surface, each sealed, each carefully spaced, like they mattered to someone. I thought they held preserves, pickled vegetables maybe. But there was no dust, no cobwebs. Nothing that said, "This has been here for years." I stepped closer. Inside wasn't vegetables, Floating in the cloudy brine were scraps, fragments of something soft and pale. Some jars held fat globs that clung to the glass like wet wax. Others had stringy bits that twisted in slow motion when bumped. I blinked, leaned in, tried to read the labels. Handwritten, faded pencil, tongue, knuckles, knuckles. My stomach folded. Some words were smeared, maybe on purpose. Others, clearer cartilage, throat, scalp. Each label scrawled in a hurry, by unsteady hands. I backed away so fast my boot slammed the warped floor, nearly fell. I grabbed the wall to steady myself, brushed a shelf, and one jar shifted with a wet clink. I didn't waste time. I stepped out, slammed the door behind me, but it didn't feel like leaving. The air outside was heavier. The trees fell closer. The ridge seemed leaned in. The creek downhill should have been straightforward. I was sure I was going the right way. I felt the slope, heard the trickle of water. But everything had shifted. Trees leaned at strange angles. Roots twisted up from the ground like they'd been flipped inside out. The trail, if there had ever been one, was gone. I kept walking. And 20 minutes later, maybe less, I saw the cabin again. Same slouch, same warped roof. But this time, the door was open. I froze. My chest locked. I knew I hadn't turned back. I'd been moving away, but there it was, straight ahead. I didn't want to approach. Every instinct screamed run, but I couldn't. Something in me had to see, had to confirm it wasn't worse. I crept close enough to look inside. The shelves had more jars. A new row stretched along the top, neat and orderly. I stared at them one by one. My eyes landed on the middle jar. Inside was cloth, red plaid, the same pattern as the shirt I was wearing. I don't even remember backing up. My legs moved on their own. Next thing I knew, I was sprinting. The woods didn't want me gone. Roots caught my boots. Branches snagged my pack. I fell hard, scraped my palms, tore my knee, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Everything was wrong, tilted, too quiet, like the air had muffled itself. Landmarks betrayed me. A rock I'd passed earlier was split in half. A tree I'd marked was gone. Or maybe it had never been there. The more I looked, the more the forest warped, flexing under some hidden weight. Then I heard water. The creek. Real or not, I chased it. I slid down the bank, half tripping, bleeding, panting. I followed the water line until the trees broke. There was the parking lot. My car, right where I'd left it. Relief hit me so hard my knees buckled. I didn't cry, but I could have. I dropped my pack, popped the trunk with shaking hands, ready to throw everything in and leave. But something was sitting in the trunk. One jar, same cloudy liquid, same smudged glass. And inside, folded with precise neatness, was a strip of red plaid cloth. The same pattern, the same wear along the hem, just sitting there like it had always been mine. I stood frozen, not breathing, not blinking. Then I slammed the trunk shut, got in the car, and drove. Didn't check GPS, didn't look back. I just drove until I saw towns I knew, until the ridges fell behind me.